The weather's still technically summerish. I can bend the rules a bit here. Gravity Falls, the show that needs no introduction at this point, one of Disney's most popular and beloved shows over a decade after it first aired and nearly a decade after it stopped airing. And it still only continues to get more popular as the years go on, with the show now being more accessible than ever thanks to it being on Disney+. And this year has been pretty eventful for Gravity Falls, with a new book and massive lore dumps being given to us, as well as the show trending for basically the entire summer. So now seems like a pretty good time to do a ranking of all the episodes, and I was honestly shocked at how many people have not done a ranking video on this show yet despite its popularity. The only one that comes to mind is Shaft's video from 2 years ago, which you should also check out, but allow me to fill this little niche while I have the time. Gravity Falls is truly unique, even among many popular cartoons that are just as popular with adults as they are with kids. I've already gone into detail over the years about my undying love for this show and how it's one of my favorite shows of all time. From the jokes that refuse to get old, the fantastic animation and artwork, the barrage of mysteries, codes, and secrets that the show constantly nudges you into trying to solve yourself, the truly unforgettable story and characters that keep you invested for the entirety of its short but sweet 2-season run. Admittedly, I may glaze this show far more than most people, but I really want to stress that this ranking was not easy. When you have a show that is as consistently amazing as this one, what should be a fun project quickly becomes a game of choosing your favorite child. Out of 40, there are no bad episodes of Gravity Falls, and at its very worst, the show is still decent. So despite the relatively small number of episodes, it's pretty hard to pick favorites with this one. But we're gonna do it anyway. All 40 of them, as well as a section dedicated to the shorts between season 1 and 2. Padding out the video's length, maybe, but I really want to leave no stone unturned with this one. I'll also be combining Weirdmageddon parts 3 and 4, and reviewing it as the 40-minute finale episode it was originally written as and released as back in 2016. I have no idea when the episodes were split, so I was always forced into pirating the show while it was still airing, given the episodes took forever to air in the UK, but Weirdmageddon will always be 3 parts in my world. And also because seeing season 2 as 21 episodes instead of 20 is psychologically irritating. Right, hope we're all good to go now. It's time to rank every Gravity Falls episode. And short. Genuinely, most shows would kill for a start as good as this. While definitely not as solid as most episodes in the show, Tourist Trap is a great first episode that does a fantastic job at setting the stage for what's to come. With Dipper and Mabel moving down to Gravity Falls to stay with Grunkle Stan for the summer and quickly learning that nothing in this town is what it seems. Establishing the mystery of the journals from the get-go and immediately dunking on Ford's paranoia with the trust no one thing. I mean, I can't blame him for being honest about his feelings like that. Not everyone gets into a situationship with a triangle. I'm getting off track already. The tone of the show is perfectly established in this episode. Mysterious, a little spooky, but still being filled to the brim with its special silly brand of humor and plenty of heart. Rewatching Tourist Trap after having watched the show dozens of times in its entirety does show that it's still a first episode of a TV show at heart and clearly has some growing pains. There's a lot more cutaway gags than there are in later episodes, and a couple of jokes are just straight up duds, and me saying that about Gravity Falls in any capacity sounds like heresy when said out loud. But for the first episode, this is remarkably solid and very entertaining. I also love going back to the end scene in the gift shop with Dipper and Mabel walking completely battered and Stan shows his caring side for the first time, mainly because I love looking at how Stan's body language is animated here. Animation details like this really help to sell how alive these characters feel, and it helps endear new viewers to Stan, who until this point was just kind of portrayed as a funny but really crummy uncle. And of course, the end of the episode shows that Stan knows far more than he lets on, and has his own secrets with the hidden room behind the vending machine. While a little rough in a handful of areas, Tourist Trap leaves a great first impression, even if it's not quite on the same level of greatness as future episodes. And within only one episode, all the rust from Tourist Trap is basically gone. While there are still a decent few cutaway gags, they're way funnier than the ones in Tourist Trap. Generally, this episode has some absolute all-timer bits. I think it's one of the funniest episodes of season 1, actually.
Uncle Stan, are you wearing a blindfold?
Nah, but with these cataracts, I might as well be. What is that, a woodpecker?
I lose it every time I watch the disposable camera scene. It just keeps escalating, and I can't mention this episode without referencing the obvious.
My ex-wife still misses me. But her aim is getting better!
The animation is also fantastic as always, and this episode really demonstrates how great Gravity Falls is at blending 2D and 3D animation together. It's so seamless, there's never a single point in the show where I think the CG animation looks off or out of place. This is all without mentioning the plot of the episode itself, which really emphasizes that behind Stan's gruffness and frequent criminal activity, he just wants to connect with his family and actually spend time bonding with them. Also, rewatching this episode with future context and seeing the Stan of war deeply hurts my soul. If you weren't won over by Grunkle Stan in the previous episode, I think this is the point where he became a universally beloved character. And the scene at the end with Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss all bonding with him while fishing is a perfect way to cap off the episode. Oh right, McGucket's here. Hi McGucket. You won't be important until later, but I'm glad you're here regardless.
In retrospect, it seems a bit contrived.
Mabel helps Stan reopen the Mystery Shack's wax museum with the reveal of a brand new statue modeled after himself, only for the statue to wind up headless. Headhunters only continues the upward trajectory in quality, and it results in one of season 1's finest episodes. I think this was the point where a lot of the brand new show imperfections began to disappear, relying far less on cutaway gags this time around. The mystery of the episode isn't too complex or hard to crack on your own, but it's not totally obvious either. But even if you do guess that the wax figures were the ones who cut off Wax Stan's head, it doesn't deflate the experience at all, and the whodunit plot lends perfectly to Gravity Falls' comedy.
Where were you last night?
Punching the clock!
You were at work.
No, I was punching that clock!
I know I keep bringing up how these episodes are reframed when you've already rewatched the show, but Headhunters is probably the most apparent example of an episode's context changing dramatically in a way I find genuinely brilliant. Stan being upset about his wax statue being murdered is very funny when you first watch the show, but when you know about everything that happened in the past between Stan and Ford, it's shockingly sad, honestly. It doesn't make it any less funny, but it becomes more darkly comedic than previously. Pretty great episode, and it's amazing how fast the show firmly establishes its identity. Here we're introduced to little Gideon, the primary antagonist of season 1, and his debut episode leaves a pretty strong impression. Gideon walks a fine line between being a serious threat and comic relief, being able to manipulate the whole town due to his successful career and generally being a slimy little creep. I think he's one of the only 10-year-olds in fiction you can say that about, but also being so over the top and pathetic given he's just a little kid having a temper tantrum without it being jarring, even when he swaps moods on the dime. He's a villain that you love to hate and is still plenty funny in his own right, which stops him from coming off as totally insufferable.
Clean up your room this instant.
I can buy and sell you, old man!
Fair enough.
Also, he's voiced by the creator of The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, who is basically my hero. The episode hinges on Gideon developing a crush on Mabel and manipulating her into dating him with peer pressure, and I like that they show Gideon and Mabel genuinely getting along and being good friends. Mabel thinks he's fun to hang around with, but the creepy advances and peer pressure make Mabel incredibly uncomfortable and she finds it hard to tell him no, both because she doesn't want to upset him as well as disappoint the people who are invested in their relationship. I've seen some people getting on Mabel's case for not settling things with Gideon herself and asking Dipper to do it for her, and I just have to wonder if any of you have any experience with being peer pressured at all. Also, she was literally just told by Stan she had to marry Gideon as part of a business deal. Not gonna lie, definitely not one of Stan's best moments. No matter what, Dipper and Mabel's bond remains strong throughout the show. The moment she sees that Gideon is trying to kill her brother, she steps in and saves him. Besides Stan's little hiccup around the midpoint of the episode, characterization is something Gravity Falls very rarely screws up on, and Dipper and Mabel are proof of this. The episode ends revealing that Gideon is in possession of Journal 2, a pretty surprising ending to what was already a pretty good episode. The inconvenient thing is where we finally start getting to know Wendy, and to this day I do wish the show would have had time to give her the spotlight at least once. It doesn't hurt the show or anything, but she leaves such a good impression on every episode she's in, and it does look kind of insane that she never got an episode to herself when Seuss of all people got one. This is also the first episode to establish Dipper's massive crush on Wendy, and though it's mostly played for laughs in season 1, I think it's handled very well across the show, especially once we get to season 2. Wendy is just a childhood crush and is too old for Dipper. She has no interest in him, but she sees no problem of hanging out and being friends with him and understands what he's going through is natural for any boy Dipper's age. This is also the first episode that really hammers in Dipper's desire to grow up too fast. He wants to be seen as mature and he wants to feel like he's mature because he's in that stage of being a preteen where everything in life is awkward and he doesn't feel like he belongs in the camp of being a kid or a teen. And I think across the show this arc is handled really well. Oh yeah, and this is the first episode that really starts pushing the more spooky and creepy vibes that the series will become synonymous with, breaking into an abandoned gas station and encountering ghosts that force him to confront his refusal to grow up naturally. And while a lesser show would probably have had Dipper face the embarrassment of everyone seeing him do this stupid f***ing dance, Wendy covers for him and keeps it between them. I really love the writing in this episode, and even when the haunting starts and things take a turn, it still balances being funny so well. I'd say this is one of the weakest episodes of season 1 in the show overall, but I'd still find it incredible that even though this episode is near the bottom of my ranking, it's still rather good. I think a lot of people tend to have gripes with it the same way that Alex Hurts himself had gripes with it. He at one point considered this to be the worst episode of the show because it felt different from what he wanted Gravity Falls to be in his head. And I do see where he's coming from to an extent. He obviously came around on it over time, but compared to a lot of Gravity Falls episodes, this one does feel a little different. Not bad though, not by any means, and I really like what this episode sets out to do with its stance on toxic masculinity and what it means to be a man. I think Mabel and Stan's teasing at the start goes a little overboard, but this ultimately ends up being a very entertaining and thoughtful episode. What Stan says at the end sums it up. Being a man is just about doing what you think is right and sticking by your beliefs. It's not about doing what's collectively seen as manly by most people. This episode actually did wonders for my own self-esteem as a kid. I always felt left out because so many kids my age were super into sports, and obviously because they were young, they still kept the boys are better than girls thing to heart, which only made me feel further isolated. I wasn't even into traditionally feminine things, I just never felt like I fit in. I love this message, and I don't think this episode falters one bit in doing it justice. Dipper trained with the Manitors to become a man only to see the flaws in their ideology and dug in his heels standing up to them. Also, the episode gave us Disco Girl, and that alone is a gift.
Disco girl, coming through. That girl is you.
Don't come in! Don't come in!
Mabel's subplot with Stan, though, could probably do without. It doesn't really go anywhere in the long term, being hand-waved away by the time Dreamscape Wars comes around, but it provides some necessary comedy that's missing from Dipper's story. Gravity Falls tries its hand at a cloning episode, and it's really damn great. One of the best episodes of the season, honestly. This episode marks the point where a lot of Dipper's goals going into the future relate to him trying to scheme some way for him to get with Wendy, and at the end of this episode specifically, he asked himself, literally, if it's even possible for him and Wendy to date, acknowledging that she's too old for him and out of his league. It's not enough to completely deter him, but he does realize and knows deep down that things probably aren't going to work out the way he wants them to. Dipper wants to use the party as an excuse to further his relationship with Wendy, and gets the idea to use the cursed, haunted, copy machine to clone himself, and naturally you can see where this goes. Even though I definitely don't ship it, and if you do I hope you burst into flames, I do like that Dipper just holding a casual off-the-cuff conversation with Wendy gave him a massive overall confidence boost, realizing that he's just making things more unnecessarily complicated with his massive contrived plan. Sappy character growth stuff aside, all of the clone shenanigans are hilarious, and I can only imagine how Jason Ritter looked in the booth talking to himself for the whole episode. Mabel's subplot also introduces us to her two best friends, Candy and Grenda, as well as her rival Pacifica Northwest. Mabel's subplot is a lot more substance here than last time, which is nice. Double Dipper is easily one of the best episodes of season 1. Two takeaways here. Mabel is still legally a US Congresswoman, and Dipper f***ing Pine stands on business. Dipper and Mabel set out to prove that Pacifica's family are frauds, and get tied up in a massive government conspiracy related to the forgotten 8.5 President of the United States, Quentin Tremblay. Gravity Falls is pretty good at writing kid-friendly political humor and just mocking politics as a whole without taking any sides. You're free to argue about whether or not that makes the show centrist or cowardly or not, but this is a Disney show primarily aimed at a family audience, so I don't think they give a shit. Quentin has very little screen time, and it's really a shame because he leaves such a strong impression and was 100% the funniest part of the episode. The credit scene of him arguing with literal babies in the Supreme Court never gets old. Mabel gets a small arc in this episode about embracing her silliness and not caring about what Pacifica or anyone thinks of her, and I love that Dipper's immediate response to Mabel not exposing Pacifica is to march over to her car and ruin her day with the evidence of her family being frauds. Let it be known that Dipper Pines is 100% verifiably that guy. I'll be honest, I don't think as highly of Time Traveler's Pig as most people do. It's still really good, but I think people tend to exaggerate it a little. I'll give Gravity Falls points right off the bat for not making time travel overly complicated. I have seen too many shows fall victim to the trappings of time travel storytelling, and it helps that the episode doesn't take its plot too seriously. No matter how silly or weird a Gravity Falls episode may get, character writing is the one thing that's always taken seriously, and given the respect it deserves. Dipper constantly traveling back in time just to correct his mistake and shoot his shot with Wendy, at the expense of Mabel's happiness and her pet, and making the decision to forsake whatever chances he thought he might have of Wendy, which as a reminder is 0, for Mabel's sake was a great moment, and her doing her best to return the favor by setting waddles on Robbie, while definitely not on the same level as the sacrifice Dipper thinks he made, speaks volumes about how these two will always have each other's backs, and I'm sick of people using this episode as a way to criticize Mabel. If you want more details on my defenses of Mabel, then watch my Mabel video, because holy god, the things people say about this character have me doing backflips. Oh yeah, and Blendin's here. Fight Fighters is a certified banger and is the main episode of television that I will always point to whenever another TV show tries to half-ass pixel art. None of that, wow, so retro, or alright, Mushroom Kingdom, we clowning this motherfucker, you better take your sensitive ass back to Sonic Prime. God, it's so ass. Paul Robertson's pixel art in this episode is a sight to behold. It looks amazing. It feels like it could have legitimately come from a real video game, and not whatever this is. The episode itself contains a lot of video game references and jokes as to be expected, but they never feel shoehorned or forced in any way. It very much feels like an episode written by people who actually play video games like Wreck-It Ralph does, and that's without mentioning how both of the plots for this episode are basically flawless. We really get a sense of just how much of a loser Robbie is, to the point that he regularly beefs with and challenges a 12-year-old to a fight, all because he genuinely thinks he has a chance with Wendy. This is another episode where Dipper's goals are mostly based around him doing something because of his crush on Wendy, and while later on in the show it can feel a little bit tiring, they still manage to put a spin on it for each episode, so it doesn't get old. Dipper summoning Rumble McSkirmish to fight Robbie for him and having to run through the video game referencing chaos just to stop Rumble from killing him, culminating in Dipper refusing to run and fighting Rumble himself, was great. And it ends with Dipper and Robbie not just magically becoming cool with each other or best friends, instead learning to hate each other in silence when around Wendy, which I thought was a nice twist on things and a lot more realistic. Mabel helping out Stan with his fear of heights while definitely not as constantly exciting as Dipper's plot is definitely the funniest part of the episode.
You know, studies show that keeping a ladder inside the house is more dangerous than a loaded gun. That's why I own 10 guns, in case some maniac tries to sneak in a ladder.
Fight Fighters is f***ing awesome, and it deserves to be in the conversation of best episodes in the show far more often. From here on, we learn that Gideon plans on taking the Mystery Shack through any means necessary, and his rivalry with Stan throughout the episode is a constant source of entertainment. Dipper and Mabel's conflict is also kinda relatable to me, not in the same way as the show, but because I was taller than my younger brother for years, and then suddenly around 2019 he had the most insane growth spurt I've ever seen, we just playfully tease each other over our heights, but it nevertheless makes the episode easier to understand and relate to. Mabel finally felt like she was winning at something compared to Dipper and went overboard with the excitement. It's a very grounded and relatable conflict, and it's wrapped up very nicely, with Dipper willingly choosing to let Mabel keep her extra millimeter. The whole size fluctuation gimmick for this episode and the crystal flashlight are sick and make for some very creative set pieces. Still a great episode to this day.
Maybe he didn't see us use it and doesn't know it's a magic flashlight that can grow and shrink things.
Really?
This isn't exactly new information, but I love that Summerween is actually becoming a real thing in some parts of America. Really puts into perspective how much of a reach this show has. But yeah, Summerween is a banger. One of the best episodes in the show for sure. I love Halloween, and I love Halloween themed episodes. And them having to contrive a reason to do a Halloween episode set in the summer is so earnestly silly that I can't help but love it. The people of Gravity Falls love Halloween so much that they celebrate it twice a year, hence the creation of Summerween. Not only is this episode one of the more creepy episodes of the show, I think it also perfectly nails the tone of Gravity Falls. Funny, silly, heartfelt with just the right amount of creepiness. The Summerween Trickster is a fantastic villain, and I'd sing my praises if people hadn't already done so ad nauseum, to the point that it will inevitably lead to me talking about how he resembles No-Face, blah 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 blah. Really, it's not just the Halloween stuff that makes me love this episode as much as I do, it's the emotional core. This is one of the few episodes leading up to the show's finale that directly addresses one of the main themes and conflicts of the show, growing up. Dipper wants to grow up too fast and be seen as mature, Mabel doesn't want to grow up at all and wants to revel in just being a carefree kid. It's for this reason that Dipper tries to bail on going trick-or-treating with Mabel and try to tag along with Wendy, despite Halloween being him and Mabel's favorite holiday. Mabel's upset not just because what Dipper is doing is selfish, but because she acknowledges that they're getting older and that there will inevitably become a time where they stop trick-or-treating and celebrating Halloween together. Not just Summerween, but this summer in general is the last chance they have to be kids before growing up. In many ways, this episode feels like a precursor to Dipper and Mabel vs. the future, but we're a long way from that episode as of now. As expected, Dipper and Mabel mend their ties, and it's probably the sweetest ending I've seen for a Halloween special. I absolutely love Summerween, and I go as far as saying it's in the running for best episode of the entire season. I've always had a soft spot for Boss Mabel. There really isn't much to it. Mabel sees problems with how Stan runs his business and treats his employees and makes a bet to see whose way of running the Mystery Shack is better. Things very quickly descend into chaos and disorder as you'd expect, and we get a nice moment at the end of the episode with Mabel rejecting Stan, admitting defeat and admitting that she didn't know what she was doing. It's a simple episode with a very simple plot and a heartwarming ending, and it works thanks to the sheer number of jokes it's hitting you with every few seconds. From Stan's antics on television, Dipper straight up traumatizing a poor couple with the Gremloblin he captured, everything involving Seuss. There's plenty of great moments here, it's just not an episode that requires a lot of time to explain. Honestly, as far as anthology episodes go, this is pretty fun. Obviously, since it's an anthology episode, there isn't really much here in the way of plot or character development, but it tells 3 very funny and creative stories without much fat. While the episode is mostly just a joke machine, I still find myself rewatching it every now and then because of its concept. It's probably the closest thing Gravity Falls has to filler, but there's enough effort here to make it worth watching. It's a very easy episode to just sit down and watch. The one thing I don't like about it is Seuss's characterization in the pinball story. While he's mostly solid throughout, it's at the very end where he struggles to wipe his high score while Dipper and Mabel's lives are in danger that I find to be a massive fumble. That aside, it's pretty fun. Alright, I'm gonna say something that's a little controversial here, bear with me. The Deep End is the funniest episode of the entire show, and no, I do not apologize for saying that.
And remember to be on alert for random wildfires.
Wait, what?
I recognize that there is some incredibly steep competition for that title, but over the years I've always noticed that this is the episode I laughed at the most. It just constantly fires its best material at you without slowing down. There are so many iconic moments in this episode. I mean, the entirety of Dipper's night guard duty. This genuinely might be the most gold crammed into a single scene ever. Stan breaking in to get a leg up on Gideon, Mabel breaking in to save Mermando, Seuss just randomly breaking into the pool for no reason to add on to the chaos, Mabel baiting Dipper due to how down bad he is for Wendy, and then blasting another f***ing hole right next to where Stan broke in. This entire sequence kills me each time I watch it. It's so well done. I can't think of anything I disliked in this episode or thought was slightly off. People bring up the ending scene as if Mabel was being selfish when she's literally just trying to save someone's life, so that's stupid. Watch my Mabel video. It really is just one of the funniest episodes in the show. I really like Mabel and Mermando's story, and yet again Dipper is doing everything for Wendy, but it's still not getting old just yet. You know, usually I'm pretty mean towards body swap episodes because I think they're very cliche and lazy most of the time. I mean, as much as I adore the Owl House, I still think the body swap episode is one of the worst in the whole show. But surprise, surprise, Gravity Falls successfully managed to tell a fun and entertaining body swap episode with some actual heart to it. Dipper and Mabel get to the point that I'm sure every sibling has gotten to at least once in their life, where they begin to drive each other crazy and want to have separate rooms. Bada bing, bada boom, Seuss finds a secret room in the shack with mysterious origins, and then the kids spend the rest of the episode fighting for Stan's approval so they can have the room for themselves, swapping bodies on accident along the way because Ford loves leaving his shit behind. There's some pretty good jokes here, and Stan giving the birds and the bees talk to Mabel and Dipper's body without realizing is just completely unhinged. And as everyone else is still fighting amongst themselves to get their bodies back, Dipper and Mabel head to the attic and confront their issues head on. How neither of them really wanted to move out, and Dipper specifically saying he felt like he needed some space given he's currently going through puberty. I really love the ending of this episode, especially the very end where Dipper and Mabel realize just how much they miss each other's company and Dipper decides to move back in. If more body swap episodes actually had more of a reason for the body swapping to even happen, like here, then I think I'd hate this trope significantly less. Well, there's not much you can say about Boys Crazy that hasn't already been said a million times, and I agree when people say it's the weakest episode of Season 1. But the weakest episode of Season 1 still being a passable, dare I say, good episode of television is nothing to scoff at. Yes, Mabel is at her worst here, and while she does acknowledge she was in the wrong and apologizes at the end, it's still not a great look for her. Yes, Dipper's subplot is kinda contrived since Robbie didn't actually take control of Wendy's mind and the music wasn't even his. Both of the plots in this episode have their fair share of problems. The episode is mostly saved by its animation and comedy, which are top notch as always, and helps drag it away from me calling it a mediocre episode. But this episode could have probably done with another draft or two. There are some great ideas here, but Mabel goes a bit too far in one direction, and Dipper's entire subplot just falls to pieces when you start thinking about it. Still worth watching for the entertainment value alone, and several times clones are very fun to watch, but as a whole, this is one of the 2 episodes in the show that I can say is carried solely by its animation and humor. Land Before Swine is excellent in nearly everything it sets out to do, and even the few issues it does have don't change what ends up being one of the most exciting and solid episodes of the season. The only issues I have are of how fast the liar reveal plot between Stan and Mabel goes, as well as Seuss's clumsiness, which feels amplified in this episode specifically so that Dipper can have some conflict with him. Both of these issues are made up for, though, by how this episode handles the characters overall. A dinosaur episode isn't really as supernatural as other threats the characters have faced so far. I mean, Stan even says as such.
You punched a pterodactyl in the face? I thought you didn't even believe in the supernatural.
Dinosaurs aren't magic, they're just big lizards. Get off my back!
But what they do with it is still very cool and creative. Dinosaurs being preserved in tree sap underneath Gravity Falls and being free due to the summer heat melting the sap. It's a neat explanation, and the visuals do not disappoint. Everything from the lighting, storyboarding, and animation is utter perfection. And as for the characters, while Stan comes off as a fair bit meaner than usual, it's more than made up for by him literally punching a dinosaur in the face. And Seuss is generally the MVP of the entire episode. He locked in for the ending, and I respect it. This episode is just really cool. It's just a cool ass episode. I love it.
He's He's a loser. He's weak. I just want to get rid of him. Yeah. Those are all things people said about me when I was a boy.
Who writes sentences like that?
Well, I think all of you are aware that this episode is where everything starts to go down. While Gravity Falls has always had an ongoing plot, the majority of Season 1 is mostly episodic with moments of continuity sprinkled in. Dreamscape Rose and onwards, the show's storytelling becomes a major focus, and it all has to do with the isosceles little bastard that Gideon summoned to do his bidding. This is Bill Cipher's debut episode, and he wastes no time showing exactly what he's about with his morbid sense of humor and Dream Demon shenanigans.
We'll see what my new minion has to say about that.
Nah, he thinks he can control him, that's adorable. Visually, this episode is truly a spectacle to behold. I mean, it won an Emmy, it was so good. And this is where the show kind of veered from being about urban legends and monsters to being more sci-fi and cosmic horror focused. And it does so splendidly. While everyone goes off trying to stop Bill from giving Gideon the code to Stan safe, Dipper is wandering through Stan's memories trying to find what Stan really thinks of him. Of course, the mean things he heard weren't actually true and were part of a really awkwardly paced sentence. If there's one thing I can criticize this episode for, it would be this entire bit here. It's a really unnecessary misunderstanding, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as to why Stan is phrasing this the way he is. I'm assuming he just started talking Dipper to Seuss's face. Seuss responds with, and then Stan goes, haha, yeah, gotcha, that's actually what people said about me when I was his age. A little unorthodox, but okay. But it leads to the final fight against Bill, and Bill warning the Pines about what the future has in store for them. And of course we end on the cliffhanger of Gideon stealing the deed to the shack and kicking the Pines out, setting up the finale. Dreamscape Rose is the best episode of Season 1 and one of the best episodes of the show as a whole. It's not a contest and it's not up for debate. Everything from Bill's mere presence and antics, the heartwarming scenes with Stan and Dipper, getting to see Stan's memories, the spectacular visuals, and ending on such a dramatic cliffhanger, this episode has it all. While Gideon Rises isn't quite on the same level of holy wow that Dreamscape Rose was on, it's still a fantastic final episode and a perfect way to end the season. The stakes and drama are appropriately high while not subtracting from the comedy. The feeling of hopelessness, while not all-consuming, definitely adds weight to everything that happens here. Gideon won, he secured the shack and got journal free, completely unaware that there were free journals to begin with. It's actually crazy how if Gideon didn't chase after Dipper and Mabel believing they had journal 1, then he probably would have won here. You know, assuming he did something about Stan being able to prove he's a fraud. There's so many good scenes in this episode, man. Stan calling the kids' parents in a panic, the utterly depressing goodbye scene when all hope was lost, the entire chase sequence with Gideon's robot, that moment where Dipper leaps across a whole f***ing chasm straight for the eye of the robot, begins beating the snot out of Gideon in order to save his sister, all capped off with Mabel finally putting a grappling hook to use. There's just so much good stuff packed in here. Stan reveals Gideon's a fraud and he's thrown in jail, takes Dipper's journal and heads to the basement. The ending scene of Gideon Rises is one of the most iconic moments in the whole show. To this day, it gives me goosebumps. It is perfectly done. The reveal that Stan has all 3 journals in his possession, the music swelling as he finally activates the portal, and the episode ends on 3 simple words.
Here we go.
Grah, it's peak, dude, it's peak, it's so fucking peak. Gideon Rises is everything a finale should be, nearly perfect in every way, and little did we know that what we were in store for next would go down as one of the most immaculate seasons of television ever written. Season 1 of Gravity Falls, while not even as close to being as creepy, intense, dramatic, or story-driven as Season 2, is still an incredible season of television. It is a goldmine of hilarious and heartfelt moments that give us time to get to know all the characters, see them grow from their experiences in subtle ways, go on silly, mysterious, and sometimes horrifying adventures as they have the best summer of their lives. While I will always prefer the heights of Season 2, I'll always have a soft spot for the simple days of Season 1. I love it and every episode within it to pieces, even when it sometimes isn't bringing its A-game. Again, it cannot be stressed how much of a miracle consistency like this is in the world of television. The fact that there isn't even one bad episode is insane to me. Now, before we head on to Season 2, we need to tackle the Gravity Falls shorts that were released to fill in the gap between Seasons 1 and 2. These are all canon, so I'm obligated to look at them anyway, but I want to make my case as we go into them for why you should watch them too, because a lot of Gravity Falls fans haven't somehow, and it's a shame because these shorts are of such high quality. So go take a break if you need it, we'll be right back with a review of every Gravity Falls short. Kicking off the Gravity Falls shorts with Dipper's Guide to the Unexplained. First off, love the animation for these. Dipper's Guide to the Unexplained is a home video series filmed by Dipper himself, and because of that it's animated like it's actually being recorded on a camera. Details like the camera shaking and the motion blur are appreciated, but I also love how they incorporate CG into this. While it's a lot more obvious than the show's previous usage of CG animation, it's just such a charming aesthetic and it's done incredibly well. They didn't need to go this hard for a series of shorts, but I'll take it. Dipper's Guide to the Unexplained is a pretty self-explanatory series of shorts, with Dipper making a guide to, well, the unexplained. I would have loved to have seen more of these. I think only having like 6 of them is a little disappointing. Regardless, Candy Monster is a simple but fun little short. The jokes are on point, the animation is great, not much else to say about it. I'm a little mixed on the idea of drawing direct attention to Stan's tattoo. While the shorts are mostly just joke machines, so expecting any serious plot developments or lore dumps is a little silly, I did kind of prefer when Stan's tattoo was just a cool detail that people took notice of and analysed. This is not really a critique, it's just a small nitpick of mine, because I can't knock this short at all, it's funny as hell, and the scene of Stan just standing in the shower waiting for Dipper to come snooping is one of the funniest bits in the whole show. The mailbox short is cool on paper and it's still good overall with some funny moments, but I just simply don't like it as much as all the others. The idea of the mailbox answering any and all of mankind's questions is just fascinating enough for a short, but not substantial enough to be included in the full episode. And while I'm usually a frequent preacher of the Church of Mabel, she wasn't all that great in this, and while there was no way of her knowing what the mailbox did, her ignorance was a little annoying. Not a huge deal though. I like this short, but it doesn't make any kind of sense at all. The concept of it is wonderfully ridiculous with this random guy always facing left, but it only works if you buy that everyone in this world is actually supposed to be a flat drawing. And Gravity Falls, while a 2D cartoon, still gives the illusion of its world and characters being three-dimensional. And it's especially apparent with Dipper's Guide specifically, considering a lot of the footage is filmed with a first-person view. So yeah, the premise doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but the short is still good. All the little green guys killing themselves one after the other once they're discovered was incredibly f***ed up, but it's so funny. This short manages to be funny and absolutely horrifying on a dime without being jarring. In fact, before season 2, I think this was probably the closest the show ever got to having any straight up horror elements. I remember being really freaked out by this short when I was a kid. Mabel's presence balances things out pretty well though, and as much as Dipper doesn't want to admit it, Barrow was a highlight. The Hide Behind is probably the best and most well-rounded Dipper's Guide short. It's got humor and spades, but also balancing the mysterious and spooky vibes that the series is associated with and known for. Liked that Dipper went for the whole documentary and interview thing with this one, with the cardboard info cards being super charming and really selling the homemade quality of this series. This is sadly the last installment of Dipper's Guide, and I wish they did way more of these, but I'm content with what we have here. Mabel's Guide is shockingly great, honestly. There isn't much to them, it's just Mabel being a goober for 2 minutes apiece, but they're incredibly funny. Many of my favorite jokes across the entire show actually come from these shorts, and I don't say that lightly. Gravity Falls is one of the funniest shows I've ever watched, and I think that says a lot about how well written the show is as a whole, and even the shorts are A-class.
Should men always pay for dinner? What is this, Russia?
Mabel's Guide to Dating also happens to be the best Mabel's Guide overall. It's so funny. It also gets points for making it very clear to everyone watching that Seuss is peak male performance, and I will not be taking any criticism. Mabel's Guide is a lot more straightforward than Dipper's Guide, so sorry if these end up being really small reviews compared to everything else, but this short is still pretty fun. I think the opening skit with Mabel waffling about the history of stickers and Dipper being a killjoy in the background went on a little too long, but everything else here is still pretty funny. I think this one is the weakest Mabel's Guide. Again, not for being bad, it's still pretty good. I just think it has the weakest jokes overall, and the final makeover with McGucket was just kind of a sucky scene in general and way too mean. I do like how completely confused and uncomfortable Dipper is in all of these. Bro does not want to be here. This short is iconic for blending Grunkle Stan with the power of queerness.
Nothing brightens a dark room like light from a window. Time to open the window!
And honestly, this entire bit makes the whole thing worth it, because otherwise it's a mostly standard fare and would only edge out Mabel's Guide to Fashion by just a bit. Really shows how much power a great gag can have when you only have a 2-minute runtime. In this short, Mabel decides to predate NFTs by a full year, and I bet if she brought them back today, they would be far more profitable.
It's just the same crummy cat face with a different hat each time.
Exactly. And I sell them for $10 each.
You need an agent? I am now your agent.
Mabel's Guide to Dating just barely inches above this one for me when it comes to comedy, but both are still really funny. Fixing It with Seuss's peak, even though the trauma remains from earlier this year. This one specifically is my favorite Gravity Falls short, and I may be biased considering Seuss has slowly fought his way over the years to becoming my favorite character. Fixing It with Seuss is just incredibly charming. Unlike Dipper's homemade VHS tape quality to his shorts, Seuss has created a web series that he edited entirely on his own, and it's incredibly endearing. All the tiny details from the shitty chroma keying on green screens to the poorly inserted clip art and images, this series would definitely be at home with pre-2010s and early 2010s YouTube, and it's immensely charming. Bolstered by Seuss being Seuss. Seuss is just effortlessly funny and easy to like. Can we please get a spin-off showing him working at the Mystery Shack? Alex, I will fund it myself if I have to. A couple of consistently funny dialogue and Seuss's unorthodox methods of fixing and sprucing stuff up. This is my favorite series of shorts out of the bunch, which is a shame because there's only 2 of them. Basically take everything I said about the golf cart episode and apply it to this, only it's slightly less peak. It's only beaten by the previous short and 2 episodes of Mabel's Guide, but those are all also really good, so I'm chalking it up to steep competition. For what is essentially a short 2-minute clip dump, everything here is pure gold, and it's only held down by the fact that Stan's Mystery Shack commercial is so goddamn funny in comparison, and takes up like half of the runtime while everything else is painfully short. Seuss says some words that's very silly and comically pointless, but Little Gideon's Big House is genuinely interesting, showing us what Gideon's life is like behind bars and still managing to get some good jokes out of it. I wish these were longer, but in Stan's defense, the Mystery Shack commercial is top tier jank. TV Shorts 2 is unfortunately the weakest short of the bunch that still has some decent moments and longer segments, but it's just not as funny overall. Nor does it have anything half as interesting as seeing what Gideon's life is like in prison. I guess seeing a shortened episode of Duck Detective is kinda neat, but I don't think I really laughed until the end of it. Mabel's Scrapbook isn't really anything special, it's just a small bite-sized adventure that offers a few decent jokes and not much else. Heist Movie is a little egregious because the concept of the Pines family trying to break into a movie theater Mission Impossible style after getting kicked out feels like a full episode idea that was left on the cutting room floor and repurposed for a small short that would occasionally play on the Disney Channel. It's funny but not really worth watching. This one has better jokes, but everything I said about the previous Scrapbook short applies here too. At least this one has a pretty morbid ending that got a good laugh out of me, as much as I expected it. I feel like there was a lot of missed potential for Mabel's Scrapbook, but there's only 2 installments of it, so I can't complain too much, especially when the majority of the other shorts have a ton of effort placed into them. The Gravity Falls shorts are pretty damn good overall. It's not unheard of for a cartoon to have some animated shorts attached that are divorced from the main plot, but the sheer consistency on display here is astounding. Some of the jokes and skits here are some of the funniest in the overall series, and the wide variety of approaches each batch of shorts took to tell their stories or tell their jokes was cool to see, even if some of them felt like they could have had more installments. Now I'm gonna rank all of these shorts here, not at the end of the video, as I don't count to the overall episode count of the main show, and also because my criteria for scoring and ranking them is a lot different to how I approach the actual show, given they are considerably shorter. I may have high praise for many of these, but don't go thinking that means they're on par with the main show, with maybe Roadside Attraction as the sole exception, but we haven't gotten there yet. Anyway, time to rank all of the Gravity Falls shorts from worst to best. Here we go. At the bottom of the list, going upwards, we have TV Shorts 2, Heist Movie, Petting Zoo, Mailbox, Mabel's Guide to Fashion, Lefty, TV Shorts 1, Candy Monster, Mabel's Guide to Colors, Stan's Tattoo, The Tooth, The Hide Behind, Mabel's Guide to Stickers, Fixing It with Seuss Cuckoo Clock, Mabel's Guide to Art, Mabel's Guide to Dating, and finally, Fixing It with Seuss Golf Cart. I cannot stress enough how impressed I am with these shorts to this day. They don't cheap out once with the animation, characterization, or the humor. I think these shorts are more than worth your time, so if you're at all curious, then go check them out. It's not riveting television, but it's very funny and charming. It's also the last time you'll be getting most of the episodic stuff from Gravity Falls as we're about to enter season 2. And my god, does it start off with a bang and then keep on sprinting. If Tourist Trap was a great, albeit slightly uneven way to begin a TV show, Scarioki is genuinely just a perfect way to start a second season. From beginning to end, Scarioki is firing on all cylinders and proves that season 2 is going to be an entirely different beast compared to season 1. The story is front and center, constantly keeping you guessing, and the stakes and drama are far higher than before, while still never sacrificing the overall tone or the amount of comedy. Even the premise of this episode being Dipper summoning hundreds of zombies just to impress some government agents is far scarier than anything in season 1, and treated a lot more seriously. Everything is dialed up to 11 from here on, and I absolutely love it. Stan being an absolute badass and fighting off the zombies may have, permanently altered my brain chemistry. Hey Mally, what's your thoughts on Stan being the shit out of zombies in Scarioki? It's sort of...
Listen.
I mean, it's...
Thoughts?
Men, it's like...
One man.
Him revealing to Dipper that he's known about Gravity Falls' weirdness all this time and was just trying to keep him and Mabel safe. The reveal that the journal was littered with secret messages thanks to the blacklights, and Stan semi-reluctantly letting Dipper and Mabel keep journal free as long as they only use it for self-defense, openly worrying about and caring for their safety in a way that season 1 Stan likely would have covered up with a joke. Everything here really sells this more intense story-driven direction season 2 is going in, and it does it flawlessly. Also, the karaoke scene was peak and just the right dosage of silliness to keep this all from being too intense. Scarioki is a flawless start to season 2, and it only continues to get better. Into the Bunker is the perfect follow-up to the end of Scarioki, as the gang are finally on the author's trail and they finally put a pin in all the Dipper and Wendy stuff, resulting in a really touching scene at the end of the episode where Wendy tells Dipper that while she's flattered, she's clearly too old for him and doesn't share the same feelings, but doesn't have any problem staying friends because they both enjoy each other's company. Moments like this really make me wish Wendy got the spotlight at least once. She's such a cool character, and if certain lines in future episodes are anything to go by, there was a lot you could do with an episode focusing on her. Again, it doesn't hurt the show in the long run, I'm just wondering about what could have been. For the rest of the episode, the only flaw I have is Mabel locking Dipper and Mabel in the caves to get Dipper to stop beating himself up over her. While it was well intentioned and she realizes she's screwed up, goes to save them both and apologizes later, I think turning off Mabel's brain just to make the scene happen was pretty dumb. Everything else though is perfect. This is also where we see Gravity Falls' habit of showing increasingly f***ed up imagery starting to take over, and I cannot get enough of it as a fan of horror. The shapeshifter is handled extremely well and the stakes remain high across the episode. The show is creating a very well laid trail of mysteries leading to the author's identity, with episodes focusing on the main plot, always ending with a new mystery to solve for a future episode. All this serious plot stuff doesn't mean the episodic stuff has to go away though, and I get really annoyed when people call the episodic stuff in Gravity Falls filler. Gravity Falls has no filler. An episode choosing not to focus on the main plot does not count as filler. All these episodes serve the purpose of endearing us to the characters and showing us more of the world. I can confidently say that if the entire show was just a straight line towards Armageddon, I think I'd like it significantly less, and we'd be missing out on total gems like this episode. The Gulf War brings back Pacifica and Mabel's rivalry and seeks to finally put an end to it, with Mabel and Pacifica being on decent terms by the end. Though Pacifica still has a long way to go before she gets her time to shine, this was still a good way of showing that she's still not all bad. Dipper is spitting facts though.
Doesn't this seem like cheating?
Pacifica's rich, Mabel. She's cheating at life.
Having a palate cleanser like this after how intense the previous 2 episodes were is very much appreciated, especially when it's as funny as it is.
Go to the golf course after dark, you say? I don't know, we'd have to break in and... Just kidding, let's break in!
The Lilliputted... God, I'm not calling them that. The Golflings and all distinct factions are very creatively handled, and I can't mention this episode without bringing up Big Henry. It's just such a good bit. The Gulf War is a much needed palate cleanser and doesn't half-ass anything for even a second. Just a rule of thumb, any episode featuring Bill Cipher is peak fiction by default. They've really stepped up how much of a mischievous little guy he is too. He's so good at manipulating people, he also managed to manipulate the audience into hating Mabel. Again, went into this with my Mabel video, but if you actually side with Bill in this episode, you miss the entire point of the scene and I hope you blow up. What makes this episode darker in retrospect is that in Journal 3, it's revealed that Bill fully intended on throwing himself off the water tower in Dipper's body and killing him to make everyone think he had gone insane and offed himself. Haven't been able to watch this episode the same way after reading that. But yeah, sock opera rules. Both the actual sock opera parts, which are as fun to watch as ever, but also everything involving Bill and Dipper rushing to get his body back before he destroys the journal. Mabel acknowledging all the times Dipper has sacrificed, well, thought he sacrificed, something for her sake, and returning the favor by kicking Bill's ass and destroying all of her hard work in front of her live audience is probably one of her best moments.
Get out of my brother's body, you evil triangle!
Whoa, children fighting! I can sell this!
Seuss finally gets the spotlight, and I don't think I could have asked for a more perfect way to handle it. I've always loved Seuss, but the more I rewatch the show, the more I've realized that he's probably my favorite character. He's always funny, but always so earnestly sweet and charming, and having an episode focusing on him trying to find someone to go out with and finding someone who loves him for who he is probably the biggest W the man's ever taken. Even the new Gravity Falls website shows that things are going well between these two. She's pregnant?! Obviously can't skip past this episode without talking about Giffany and how the episode lovingly makes fun of visual novels. How the f*** did they get away with that? In fact, I think Disney's standards and practices fell asleep when watching this episode because this might be the least censored episode in the series.
Before I ascend to heaven and live with the angels.
And with Grandpa.
No, he is not there.
And I'm forever grateful for that, because I would not want to live in the world where the cash money credit sequence doesn't exist. Oh, thank God, I managed to get through the section without mentioning FUCK! Not much to say about this one, honestly. For one thing, this is the only episode in the series that's considered non-canon, and while that gives them plenty of leeway to go far out of the anthology stuff, from super smart Waddles voiced by Neil deGrasse Tyson to the entire claymation bit, it does make this the least rewatchable episode for me personally. Also, Stan just drugging someone and kidnapping them at the end. Okay, I think I see why this episode isn't canon now. It's still funny, it's just that the whole episode feels like a poor man's bottomless pit. The claymation part though was really good. As someone who adores stop motion, I loved every part of this. Another runner-up for best episode in the series. Society of the Blind Eye continues from where Sock Opera left off, and if you know anything about the build-up to this episode and the hurdles Alex Hirsch had to go through just to throw fans off the sense of the author's identity, you'll respect this episode way more. Finding out McGucket worked for the author and created the Society of the Blind Eye as a way to help people forget bad memories, becoming so reliant on the memory gun that he destroyed his mind over time was a massive gut punch. Taking this character who was only previously used to tell jokes and giving them what's arguably the most tragic backstory in the whole show was brilliant, and generally the way McGucket was handled here was very well done. Still being able to tell jokes with him, but treating him with a lot more respect and care that's reflected in how the characters now talk to him. We're getting close to figuring out the author's true identity now, and the clues just keep piling up. Another episode focusing on Seuss, and while he isn't the protagonist this time, this is very close to entering my top 5 episodes of the whole show. While seeing Blendon again was cool, choosing to focus on Seuss's feelings towards his deadbeat dad and discovering why he hates his birthday so much almost made me forget Blendon was in the episode until Dipper and Mabel start competing against him in Globnar. Seuss seeing all the efforts and the trials Dipper and Mabel went through just to make him happy finally gets him to realize that his dad never really cared and that he's found his family in Dipper, Mabel, and Stan. It's a very moving episode despite Justin Roiland's screeching and the inherent silliness. And I just love Seuss so much, man. I want to hug this guy. I don't have much to say. Blendon's game is very straightforward, but it's basically perfect. You know what isn't perfect though? I don't know what went wrong with Love God. On one hand, this is still a good episode. It's again mostly carried by the jokes, and no one's forgetting the hot air balloon scene. I die every time I watch it. It's too good. John DiMaggio naturally brings a lot of energy with his performance, and I like that Mabel tries her best to reach out and help Robbie when no one else wants to or cares about him. It says a lot about how caring she really is, even if the episode's plot loses its mind. Everything involving love potions makes me nauseous, and there would be no problem here if it wasn't for the ending throwing the entire episode under the bus. I don't really care that Journal 3 says that if someone is still in love after the love potion wears off and their feelings are genuine, because not only is that not explained in the show, but it also feels like a very hasty correction because they realize they screwed up here. Leaving Robbie and Tambry drugged just because they're happy together is really bad, and the fault doesn't just lie with Mabel here, it lies with Dipper for being okay with it, and the episode in general for selling this as the moral. Yes, you shouldn't play with people's fates, that part is perfectly fine, but it's undercut by the fact that Robbie and Tambry are f***ing drugged. Their fates were played with in the first place. It says a lot that an episode with a plot and moral this muddled can still be good and worth watching from entertainment alone, but this is definitely one of season 2's low points. Thankfully, the show course corrects and we're back with peak fiction.
So if you're not a fan of the words, peak fiction, goat, raw, fire, click off of the video. Cause those are gonna come up like 50 times in here, man.
Northwest Mansion Mystery is so damn perfect it hurts. Still have no idea how they got away with this scene. Like, the stuff SMP was content on shooting down doesn't even come close to how dark this is. The episode has Dipper and Pacifica share the spotlight, and we finally get to see the good in Pacifica. Her development may feel a little fast, but it's only because she's always resented her parents for forcing her to uphold their family's image, being treated like a trained animal more than a human being, having her be the one to confront Archibald's ghost, basically the embodiment of her family's sins, and choosing to be the driving force for change in her family by letting the townsfolk in on the Northwest party was a great moment. It's also a good thing that Wendy isn't in this episode, because if I found out my ancestors were killed by a rich family, I would be an anarchist for the rest of my life. Pacifica's chemistry with Dipper is great, the episode nails the spooky vibes, and while Mabel's subplot could probably have been cut, it's still fun to watch. Also, the ending really kicks it up a notch, McGucket trying to warn Dipper about the portal's activation, the agents from Scarioki are gearing up to storm the Mystery Shack, everything the show has been building up to is coming to a boil. And man, is it the best boil to ever be boiled. Not What He Seems is a masterpiece, and this is not up for debate. From start to finish, this episode is a constant rush of emotions that throws these characters you've come to love into a dangerous, uncertain situation with so many twists and turns and bombshell reveals. It keeps you on the edge of your seat for its entire runtime. There's not a single moment here that feels off, has some sort of annoying contrivance, or feels unnecessary. There's no fat or missteps to speak of. Stan is arrested by the government, who are trying to locate the portal and prevent it from tearing the universe apart. Meanwhile, Dipper and Mabel go from trying to clear Stan's name to questioning everything about him. This is why the non-story focused episodes can't just be skipped or written off as filler. If we didn't have these, this episode would lose its impact. We've seen these characters have fun, solve mysteries, and grow in all of these subtle ways across the series, and this episode finally places them in a potentially world-ending scenario with their bonds at the center of it. You're placed in the same situation that they are, loving Grunkle Stan to pieces but unsure if you're able to trust him and questioning everything about him. His identity, his motives, if he even really loves his family or is just manipulating them. It really hits you in this final scene that you're completely emotionally invested in these characters. They feel like real people. Mabel's decision to trust Stan and not shut the portal down is probably the hardest decision she's ever had to make, and from a logical standpoint, she should have no reason to trust him. Decades worth of lies have finally caught up to him, and he's operating something that even the author of the journal states is potentially world-ending. Dipper, thinking logically, sees shutting the portal down as their only option, and to a lot of viewers who are also thinking logically, this is the best thing they can do. Mabel's hesitation is due to the fact that even though Stan's lies have been discovered, even though what he's doing is dangerous, and even though she has no idea if he's even related to them anymore, she can see that he has always cared about them. All the things that he did for them across the series seem easy to forget in a situation this dire, even when the proof of his love is sitting on his desk. So because of that, even knowing how much is at stake, she trusts him, trusts that everything he has ever done has been for his family, and we see right after her trust was well placed, as from out of the portal comes Stanford Pines, the author of the journals and Stan's twin brother. While the episode is far more intense than anything to come before and loses a bit of that balance between jokes and drama, the episode is so perfectly written, paced, animated, and executed in general that it earns the more serious tone. Everything is built up to this, and it's why no matter how many times I rewatch the show, even knowing all of its tricks and twists, I am still utterly floored by Not What He Seems. Immediately following up on Not What He Seems, we're finally introduced to Ford, and the episode delves into him and Stan's past. How they grew up together, how they fell apart, what led Stan to a life of crime and swindling, Ford moving to Gravity Falls, writing the journals, and what led to Ford being stuck between dimensions in the first place. All of the lies and fake identities and even Stan faking his death are all explained so naturally here. It's an episode that still manages to be funnier than Not What He Seems, but at its core it's a pretty tragic story. How one single screw-up from Stan tore his family apart, how another screw-up separated him from his brother for good, how he lived with guilt for 30 years trying to bring his brother back, how he had to assume his brother's identity and fake his own death in order to keep living and to have time to reactivate the portal. It's a very sad episode, but getting to see Stan and Ford's past in any capacity was always going to be cool, and it doesn't disappoint. The ending specifically always sticks with me, because of how much it foreshadows what happens later on. Mabel is scared of her and Dipper either drifting apart or falling out the way that Stan and Ford have. Both sets of twins mirror each other. Dipper and Mabel right now are just like how Stan and Ford were until the end of high school. The way Dipper isn't worrying about the possibility and Mabel stays awake at the thought of it. God, it's such a haunting shot considering what happens later. A Tale of Two Stans is another pitch perfect episode and manages to smoothly transition to the next part of the story. Now, some people have a problem with the second half of Season 2B by saying that a lot of the episodic episodes are breaking up the story, considering we only have about 9 or so episodes left to watch. I disagree with this argument because not only do I think the show needs a palate cleanser after the back-to-back madness of Northwest Mansion, Not What He Seems, and Two Stands, but also this gives us some valuable time to spend with Ford in a not-so-serious situation which helps endear us to him considering he just showed up. There's only one episode I don't think this applies to, that being Roadside Attraction, but I have no problem with Dungeons or Stanchurian Candidate, and I think they're great episodes. I'm not much of a D&D guy myself, I can never get into it personally, but I still understand it enough on a basic level to see how much love was poured into all the references and jokes. Also, I mean, they got Weird Al to voice the episode's villain, how can I not love this? Watching Dipper and Ford bond over their love of the game, being the first genuine friend Ford has had in years, was really sweet, and I like that by the end of the episode, Stan rescinds his previous stance on the kids not being able to interact with Ford. He recognizes that just because there's a rift between them, there's no problem in letting the kids hang out with him sometimes, and at the end of the day, he's family. And hey, it's not like the plot is entirely halted with these episodes. Ford shows Dipper he's contained the rift, but because he's still distrustful of his family, he tells him to keep it a secret, a fact that would later be their own undoing. Dungeons is pretty great overall. If you thought Irrational Treasure got political without taking sides, then check this out. I think if Kamala or Trump did this in front of a live audience, they would secure every state in a landslide. Also, Ford was canonically contracted to create a mind control tie for Ronald Reagan, and I don't think enough people acknowledge that. Again, it's a Disney show, so they can only go so far with the political jokes without dividing people, and I think they do that pretty well. Taking aim at politics as a whole is the best move they could have done for an episode about Stan running for mayor, and to the episode's credit, it's one of the funniest in the series. It also features the return of Gideon, who I can't say has been sorely missed, given Bill is a much more effective villain than he ever was, but if they were gonna bring him back in any episode, I think this was the best one to go with. The ending was sweet, and the credits scene teases Bill's return in the next episode. We're back to the main story stuff, and this one just comes out of the gates swinging. Bill invades Stan for his dreams and taunts him about the upcoming apocalypse and puts the Pines on the clock. While the episode is mostly centered around Mabel trying to prove she's pure of heart to obtain some unicorn hair to protect the shack with, the stuff involving Dipper, Ford, and Bill is incredibly compelling, giving us more insights into what exactly Bill is and just how long he's been around for, and going into how Ford and Bill met and became friends in the first place. While they obviously don't go into everything that we know now thanks to the Book of Bill and how their falling out was portrayed as an incredibly messy breakup, but what's here works, and for a second they really get you with the reveal of Ford's Bill memorabilia and artifacts in the memory gun scene. Back to Mabel, I love how they acknowledge that Mabel isn't some perfect saint and has her issues, but that they don't make her a bad person. She embraces her imperfections and fights a f***ing unicorn to get what she wants to protect her family. Sure, they could have gone a little further over addressing some of Mabel's faults, but I'll gladly take this. We end with the shack being protected from Bill, but that's not going to stop him from finding his next pawn and getting his way regardless. Well, here we are. The first episode of the show I can give a 6 out of 10 at most. This is the worst episode of the show, and again, the fact the worst episode is only okay is nothing to be ashamed of, but I just don't know what they were cooking. Okay, scratch that, I understand what they were trying to do, it's just really undercooked. Many people have claimed this episode is out of order with the rest of them and that it was meant to air a lot earlier in the story, hence why it focuses on Dipper trying to get over Wendy. This is a baseless rumor though, and was likely spread because of how frustrated people were over its placement in the season, which I won't defend. I was okay with Dungeons and Stanchurian Candidate, and I'd be fine if this episode was also episodic, but the plot of this episode just doesn't make it worth watching, honestly. It's incredibly inoffensive, but it is irritating. Dipper obviously wasn't just gonna instantly get over Wendy, but having this happen in the show's final stretch was not a good decision. If the episode aired earlier, I'd be a lot more receptive to it, but it also wouldn't solve the main problem of it feeling like a fanfiction. And yes, I'm aware when YouTube critics say something feels like a fanfiction, it's usually a very vague critique, but the whole thing feels off. Candy developing a crush on Dipper over a minor boost in confidence, Dipper flirting with multiple girls and having them all coincidentally show up in the exact same location while Dipper is with Candy feels so cosmically ridiculous even by Gravity Falls standards of silly things happening. It again helps that the jokes are all on point, and because we're finally venturing outside Gravity Falls for a change, there's a lot of variety in the backgrounds and artwork. As an episode of Gravity Falls, it is fine. As an episode of any other cartoon, it'd probably be good, but this entire thing feels like it's beating a dead horse, and I usually skip it whenever I revisit the series, which is something I don't think I can say for any other episode, not even Love God or Boys Crazy. But hey, at least we get confirmation that Stan married either the Owl Lady from the Owl House, so that's something. Dipper Mabel vs. the Future is thankfully a swift return to peak fiction, and it's in my top 3 episodes of the show. Dipper and Ford's plot is one of the most exciting and deeply interesting parts of the show. The reveal that aliens exist in this universe and crash into Gravity Falls, potentially being the reason for all its strange happenings. Dipper riding an alien prison droid over the town and learning to control his fears as he stares down the barrel of a gun was metal as just to save Ford from being abducted. It's just so good, oh my god. And that's without mentioning the dilemma of Ford's apprenticeship. Dipper knows that there's something off about it. It's offering him the cheat at life he's always dreamed of, being tutored by his hero and being a professional mystery solver with his uncle for the rest of his life, fulfilling his fantasy of wanting to grow up as fast as possible. But it would also rob him of the most important years of his life as he becomes a teenager. So many crucial life experiences that he'd be missing out on, and most importantly, it'd separate him from Mabel. This is something Ford tries to convince Dipper is a good thing, that he'd no longer be held back by her. And as much as I love Ford, it's a really insensitive projection of his issues with Stan onto Dipper and Mabel's relationship. He doesn't understand how they tick, and he's biased against siblinghood in general. Not to mention how it's the same song and dance that he gave McGucket all those years ago, and look how he turned out. It's a deal that would give Dipper what he dreams of having, but not what he needs. It's an unhealthy fantasy, and unfortunately after hesitating, he chooses to indulge in it, putting him at odds with Mabel, who spends the whole episode having her hopes for the future shot down. An entire day meant to be focusing on their birthday party spent wallowing in the ashes of her dreams, and hearing that her brother wouldn't be coming back to California with her is the last straw. It breaks her. I'm never gonna be upset at Mabel for this scene. It's a completely understandable reaction for a girl her age, and unfortunately, Bill sees his chance to make his move. He disguises himself as Blendon, a close ally, lies to Mabel's face about his intentions, and then tells her to hand over the rift while downplaying its significance. If Mabel just gives her time-traveling friend this small snow globe, he'll let her have just a little more summer. You can see why she thought it would be fine, especially given the state she's in. And because of Ford's own paranoia and refusal to trust his family, she doesn't know about the rift's importance. And so, Bill wins, and Weirdmageddon commences. This is one of the most tightly written episodes of the series, showing how far everyone has come while still showing how much they still need to grow, setting up the finale with incredible dramatic flair. Weirdmageddon Part 1 is an awesome way to kickstart the finale. Mabel is trapped in the bubble, Stanford gets captured, and Bill destroys the journals in front of Dipper's face. Bill's apocalypse is here, and it's definitely on brand. Weirdmageddon never shies away from being weird and creepy at all times, and it lets the artists and animators go nuts for some of these scenes. And as if Bill wasn't already seen as a super powerful threat, he just one-shots Time Baby and the Time Police, no hesitation. The race against Gideon and his goons was great and a blast to look at, and while I think Gideon's redemption is definitely sort of rushed, it's still handled with enough grace so that I don't mind, and it feels completely in character. It doesn't feel like he just switched up on Bill unnaturally. Weirdmageddon Part 1 is a lot less complex than the next 2 parts, but it's still an incredible episode and a brilliant way to start the show's finale. I don't enjoy Weirdmageddon Part 2 as much as Part 1, but what we have here is still visually dazzling, hilarious, and emotionally charged. Mabel is scared of growing up after being hit with all the harshness and unpredictability of reality all at once. Her future is uncertain and it terrifies her. Mabelland is her escape, offering her and everyone within their deepest desires and fantasies to indulge in. It proves to be completely irresistible to everyone, including Dipper. He only snapped out of it because he's been through the Wendy song and dance too many times. He knows it's not meant to be. And while the court case scene is definitely a bit of a crazy idea, Dipper directly confronting Mabel, acknowledging her fears and understanding why she's hiding away from facing reality, and telling her that no matter what life throws at them, he'll always be there for her, and sees Ford's apprenticeship for the utter scam that it is was such a powerful moment. In this moment, he's not trying to appease Mabel. He is deciding that he wants to grow up normally, no cheats involved, and he wants to be right by his sister as he does it. Mabel after this even tells him that if he does decide to stay with Ford, she won't get in his way, and he still tells her it's not gonna happen. This is where both Dipper and Mabel finally complete their series-long arcs and confront their fears related to growing up. While I think Part 1 is more consistently entertaining, Part 2 is a very worthwhile follow-up. I mean, what else is there to say about Weirdmageddon Part 3 that hasn't been said? I know I've said the words perfect and peak a lot in this video, but genuinely, this is one of the most perfect finales to a TV show ever. And I will not be taking questions, it just does everything right. The story stakes and the emotional stakes are the highest they've ever been. Everyone and everything that the characters have met and experienced across every episode come back for one final confrontation against Bill in order to take back Gravity Falls. The Shatron fight utilizing basically everything set to a guitar cover of the theme song was definitely a cliche, but who gives a flying f when it's this cool? Getting to see the Zodiac and everyone's theories on who fulfilled which symbol was awesome. Bill's defeat was smartly handled and incredibly satisfying. The heartbreak over realizing that Stan's mind had to be erased just to achieve such a miracle. And when you can argue that him getting his memories back as quickly as he does is a cop-out, it's still handled with so much emotion that I really don't care. And it just keeps going with the payoffs without feeling like any of it is being rushed. Dipper and Mabel's birthday parties, Stan and Ford mending their ties and finally sailing out to sea for the adventure of a lifetime, Seuss becoming the owner of the Mystery Shack, it all hits like a truck. And the less I say about the final scene, the better, because I might just burst into tears on mic. The only real flaw is that Stan and Ford arguing when everything is at risk just barely fell off the line of reasonable and contrived, but it's outweighed by how immensely great everything else here is. While there are other mysteries and small little things that are addressed in future books, all the important stuff is paid off masterfully. They even took a shit on Disney's carpet on the way out. I'll never forget this finale, it's just too good, and it's the main reason why I was cautiously optimistic about the Book of Bill's existence, along with any additional material that adds to Gravity Falls' canon, because while it certainly wouldn't be unwelcome, and I definitely want something new involving different characters, Dipper and Mabel's story is over, and ended about as perfectly as it could. I don't know what they could do to honor it or even top it. Gravity Falls Season 2 is a generationally perfect season of television. Despite a couple of missteps, it's just a constant barrage of bangers, and just when you think it's reached its peak, it just keeps getting better. From the story and mysteries, the character development, the dramatic beats, heart-tugging moments, the jokes, the animation, everything is an improvement on Season 1. And it's simply one of the best seasons of television I've ever watched, and solidified Gravity Falls as one of my favorite shows ever. I've done a lot of glazing in this video, but that's because when it comes to Gravity Falls, there's only so much you can critique before you're grasping at straws. And I honestly don't think we're going to see anything like it again from Disney. They've made it abundantly clear that they're prioritizing less story-driven cartoons, and there's nothing wrong with episodic comedic cartoons. Anyone who's saying there is a problem is just being ignorant and needs to acknowledge that they're watching shows that are made with children in mind. But because of this shift, we're likely never going to get something like Gravity Falls again. Amphibia and Owl House are the closest we have, and as much as I love those shows, they just don't match the consistency of Gravity Falls. I don't want to go too far and say Gravity Falls is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of show. I mean, come on now, I'm not that much of a glazer, but there's really nothing else quite like it. And with that, we've finally finished and I'm ready to rank every episode. Because we did the ranking of all the shorts earlier, we won't be covering those and are just going to stick to the main 40 episodes in Season 1 and 2. Unlike the Star Versus ranking, there's a lot less episodes here for me to mull over individually, which means I think I can confidently rank them in order of quality and enjoyment this time. I'm still relatively new to ranking videos, so having a smaller project for me to get my bearings with is a good thing. But without further ado, here is every Gravity Falls episode ranked from worst to best, starting off with Roadside Attraction, Boys Crazy, The Love God, Dipper vs. Manliness, Little Gift Shop of Horrors, The Hand That Rocks the Mabel, Bottomless Pit, Tourist Trapped, Boss Mabel, Little Dipper, Irrational Treasure, Dungeons, Dungeons and More Dungeons, The Legend of the Gobblewonker, The Inconveniencing, The Stanchurian Candidate, Carpet Diem, Headhunters, The Time Traveler's Pig, The Gulf War, Double Dipper, Fight Fighters, The Deep End, Land Before Swine, Scarioki, Weirdmageddon Part 2 Escape from Reality, Seuss and the Real Girl, Weirdmageddon Part 1, Gideon Rises, Summerween, Into the Bunker, Sock Opera, The Last Mabelcorn, Society of the Blind Eye, Dreamscaperers, Blendin's Game, A Tale of Two Stands, Northwest Mansion Mystery, Dipper Mabel vs. the Future, Weirdmageddon Part 3, Take Back the Fall / Somewhere in the Woods, and finally, Not What He Seems. So, I think you probably have an idea of how much I love this show, huh? I mean, it's one thing to make an entire retrospective celebrating the show's 10-year anniversary, as well as a video ranking every individual episode in short. I mean, I can go further. I own 2 Book of Bills. But yeah, overall, my thoughts on Gravity Falls are likely never gonna change. It is a show that has stood the test of time, and even 12 years later is still finding new fans. I'll always love this show, and the impact it's had on my life cannot be understated. If you're watching me for the first time, well, first of all, hi. Second of all, watch my Gravity Falls retrospective and my recent Mabel video if you somehow want more insight into what I think about this show. Also watch them anyway, because I think both of these videos are some of my best work. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you somehow watch this video in one sitting, you get I don't know, $10 maybe. I think I'm getting a little better at this ranking video thing, so expect some more of these in the future. Thank you all for watching. If you only watch my Gravity Falls stuff, then see you next summer. Also play Yakuza.